1100, 11 o'clock. That's what it says at the top of my page. Just before we get to your question, let's just, a quick introduction. We kept talking last week about this song that was going to be sung. We finally reached it, Parshat Haazinu. If you take a look at the way that it appears on the pages, so it appears in two columns, right? Which doesn't normally. This is not the way things are normally written, but in the Sefer Torah, that's what it looks like as well. Right. It's to show that it's a shir. It's a shira. It's a song of some kind. Let's have a quick word of introduction. A song. This is not. When we talk about a shira and when we translate it as a song, we're not doing justice to what it really is. Because when we think about a song, so whatever will pop into your mind, that will be a song. Whatever your favorite song is, that's probably what will pop into your mind. That's not what it is. The Gemara says that there were 9 songs, 9 shirot that have been sung over the space of Jewish history. And there will be a 10th one which will be sung by the Mashiach, and that will be the final one. Which means that each one of these is bringing us closer and closer to where we need to get to. Now, I'm going to try to go through the list. I hope I get them all. If not, let's try and work it out together. The first song is Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat, which was composed by Adam in the Garden of Eden, and it was composed in honor of Shabbat, right? Which is why it's called Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat, I guess. Whatever. We've got Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat. That's the first of the songs. Now, I'm just going to tell them over in the way that I can remember them, which means it might chronologically, it may not be in order, but we then have Shirat Hayam, like the splitting of the Red Sea. We then have Shirat Miriam, which is the women going off and singing their own song at the splitting of the Red Sea. First the men sang, and then the women they sang afterwards. We have Shirat Be'er, which we had a couple of weeks ago, which is the song of the well, right, which was the parsha that Miriam died. The Jewish people composed a song, in honor. Moshe Rabbeinu composed a song in honor of the well. We have Parshat Haazinu, right, which is the 5th one. That's the song of Haazinu. And then moving out of the Chumash into Tanakh, we then have Shiras David, right? King David wrote a song at the end of his life. We have Shirat Chana. We have Shirat Devora. We have Shir HaShirim. Oh, that's it. Hey, we made it. That's 9. We've got 9. Sorry, those are 9. I'm trying to think of the 10th one, right? I told you the 10th one's going to be sung by the Mashiach, right? Oh. Those are the 9 songs that have been sung. The 10th one is going to be sung by the Mashiach. Interestingly enough, in the words of the Pasuk, in the words of the Navi, it's going to be a Shir Chadash. Right? What's fascinating? A new song. But what's interesting is that all the other ones are called a Shira. Shira is a song in the feminine. Shir is a song in the masculine. Normally when you've got the hey at the end of the letter, I'll try that again, even though absolutely nobody latched onto the fact that what I said was completely ridiculous.
That was ridiculous.
Thank you. I said that, I said when you've got a hey at the end of the letter, and it just flew past everybody. But what I meant to say was when you've got a hey at the end of the word, that normally denotes feminine. So shira is a feminine of a song. Shir is a masculine of a song.
Are you saying that we've been calling it a shira up until now?
All of the 9 that have been sung have been called. They're called a shira.
So then this is going to be a new one because it's going to be better than the others.
It's going to be a shir chadash. It's going to be in the masculine. It's going to be something new, right? Which definitely indicates some kind of a new, like a new vista, something that we haven't had up until now. But it's also in the masculine to explain. They explain like this. In the Medrash it says that the shira is feminine because all of these things, they're bringing us closer to the Geula, they're bringing us closer to redemption, but we're not there yet, which means that we're going to have to go through more travails afterwards, more sorrow and anguish afterwards, until we reach that moment of the Shir Chadash. A little bit like a lady who goes through the discomfort and the pain of pregnancy and giving birth, only to do it again afterwards. Right? But we're going to get to a Shir Chadash when the Mashiach comes, which means that will be the end of the sorrow. It will be the end of our anguish. It will be the end of our suffering. It should happen very soon.
Amen.
Thank you. I have been trying to convince you, right, that when you hear things like that, you're supposed to say Amen. I appreciate your cooperation. I really do.
Helping me, actually.
Huh?
I've been saying Amen more often because of you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I'm going to say more Amen, more less because of you.
Thank you. Well, at least you're balancing each other out. That's good, right? So Mitzvah Hashem, when the Mashiach comes, we'll have a Shir Chadash. That's it. We won't need to go through any pain and any suffering again after that, in order to be able to reach that moment in history where we're going to connect together with God.
Can I ask you a question about the Mashiach?
You may ask. I'm not convinced that I'm going to be able to answer it.
When he comes, what's the point of being here?
Good question. No, it really is a good question. I don't know. I don't know why you're asking that particular question. What triggered it off? But the
You're
sages.
talking about the Mashiach.
No. I mean, why is that the particular detail that you're?
Because when Mashiach comes, what's the point of being here? Because ultimately we reach whatever the
Yeah.
point where we want it to be.
Yeah.
So then what's the point of continuing living?
It's a good question.
Depends on why Mashiach will come, right? 'Cause you could-
No, once the Mashiach has come, that's it. We're done. We've got to the end.
So why?
Which means even pre-Mashiach, that very much depends on why he's coming, right? Which means that if he's coming because God set aside a certain time and we haven't reached where we're supposed to reach, it's going to be very traumatic and very painful. If we do what we're supposed to do, we can bring him now, but the end result is going to be the same. Once the Mashiach arrives, then that's it. Right? We're done. So what do we have to do? I'm not sure. I tell you the truth. I'm not 100% sure. I'll give you a little analogy to try to explain what the function is, but just to explain the question properly. It says like this: that when the Mashiach comes, right now we get a lot of reward for doing mitzvahs, right? Whenever we do mitzvahs, you're getting lots of reward. Why are you getting lots of reward for doing mitzvahs? Because we've got a very overactive Yetzer Hara telling us not to do the mitzvahs, right?
But once Mashiach comes, the Yetzer Hara will be no more.
The Yetzer Hara will be there. The Yetzer Hara will be just a theoretical option.
So what's the point of living?
Hold on, 1 minute. We're going to get there. I understood the question. I'm just explaining it to the people out here who might be, not quite on the same wavelength. Which means like this: that when the Mashiach comes, then there'll be very little reward for doing the mitzvahs because you won't have anything battling against you, telling you not to do it. Right? Your clarity will be everything will be so clear that your relationship with God, you can have a theoretical choice that you don't want to do a particular mitzvah, but it'll only be a theory. It's only theoretical. It's an academic thing. Like Rav Dessler says, that you can have a raging fire with a $1 million diamond in the middle of it. And all you've got to do is just step into that fire momentarily to pull it out, and then you'll be $1 million richer than you were, right? No one's going to do that. At worst you'll die, and at best you'll come out so terribly disfigured and in pain and who knows what, that it's not worth it, right? Says Rav Dessler, in the Yemotze Mashiach, the choice between doing what's right and doing what's wrong will be so obvious, it'll be so clear, that you won't be choosing to do something which goes against the will of God.
So then you're saying that when Mashiach comes, your free will is ultimately taken away from you?
It's not taken away, it's left, but the clarity is such that it's not really applicable. It doesn't have any practical application to it. You know what it's like? It's like you want to throw a brick through the jeweler's window, right? But there's a policeman standing on the corner. Are you going to do it? You're not going to do it, right? That's what it'll be like. So here, to try to answer your question, what's the point of being alive when the Mashiach comes? So I think the answer is like this. You may hear different ideas from different places, but I think the answer is like this. When you take a course of medication, right? Let's say you take antibiotics, and the doctor puts you on antibiotics for 7 days or for 10 days, whatever you've got, right? We all of us know that at some point you're going to feel great, and you really don't understand why you have to keep taking that medication. and come, get to the last few days, and it's like it's a real, so for a lot of people, it's like a real uphill struggle to keep taking the medication, because you've got to remember to take it, and maybe it doesn't taste so good, and sometimes antibiotics, depending on what kind you're taking, they mess up your stomach a little bit, and it's, you would prefer not to do it. However, we all know that if you don't finish up your course of medication, then what happens? There'll be a regression, right? And you'll end up having all over again what it was that you had, and this time it'll be a little bit harder to take care of it, because the body's already built up a little bit of a system against the antibiotic itself. Maybe you'll have to try something stronger, maybe try something else. I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a world where we have we have to take the medication that he's giving us. We have to work very hard on trying to overcome the Yetzer Hara. We have to work very hard on wanting to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do. And at the end of all of this, when he sends a Mashiach, that's like the last day that you're taking your medication. You don't feel that you need to take it. You don't see what the point of that is. But if you don't, then it's not going to finish up what was started. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a system whereby the end of the process is a messianic era. That's what's called the Yemot HaMoshiach. Why does it have to be like that? I don't really know. In order for us to be able to live our lives connected to God in an absolute way, that we understand and we see and we feel and we don't have any doubts, and we're going to be able to do what God wants us to do. What are we getting out of this exactly, if we're not going to get very much reward for doing something when there's nothing pushing against us and telling us not to do it? I don't know. Something that we have to experience. This is a part of what God wants us to experience in order for the world to reach what's called its tikkun. Right? Tikkun ha'olam, the ultimate rectification of the world. I get more than that. Can I explain more than that? No, not really.
Don't need to. It's good.
Good. Okay. That's great. Here. Let's have a look at Parshat Haazinu. All of that was just introduction, right? Okay, here we go. Parshat Haazinu. Again, now, a part of the problem that we're going to have with Parshat Haazinu is that I mentioned the other day, is that it's very, very poetic. The language is very poetic. It's very beautiful, right? But it makes it a little bit difficult for us to be able to first of all, to translate it and do justice is probably not going to happen at all, but we'll do our best, right? Haazinu hashamayim v'adabera v'tishma oretz imrei fi. So give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and may the earth hear the words of my mouth. So you asked a question before, right, about this idea of Haazinu. Here it's not talking about the Jewish people, it's talking about Haazinu hashamayim v'adabera, that the heavens should give ear, the heavens should listen to what it is that's being said.
How come it's not physical?
In a minute, we'll get there in a moment. Tishma oretz imrei fi, and the earth should hear the words of my mouth. Right? So you want to know, how can something that's not human hear, or not
What's he referring?
Not
I've got this. What's
animal.
he referring to the kids, to all the children that were yet to be born, in the sense that when he said heaven, when he relates to heaven.
Over here, he's talking over here, really, rather literally, he's calling the heavenly earth to come to bear testimony to the fact that the Jewish people are connected to God, right? Which means that he's using a lot of poetic license over here. When he says, Haazinu hashamayim v'daber, it's true that Shamayim doesn't hear, and the Oretz doesn't hear, the heavens and the earth don't hear in the way that human beings hear, the way that animals hear, that's for sure. But nevertheless, he's calling them, and he's using human language so that the Jews there should be able to understand what he's doing.
It's not only that, in the previous Parshat, he said, I shall bear heaven and earth to bear testimony against you. And this time he's saying, I shall bear it to bear for you.
Yeah.
And then he's changing his way a bit.
I think it's emphasizing much more over here than it was before. Which means before he's saying that the heavens and the earth should be witnesses. Yeah. But it's more general. Right? Over here it's like, no, come and listen to this. I want you to hear. Right? Mm-hmm. There's no getting away from this. Right? Haazinu hashamayim v'adabera, give ear, O heavens, and I will speak. V'tishma oretz imrei fi, and the oretz, the land. I'm sorry, the earth will hear the words of my mouth. Ya'aroif kamata likhi, tizal katal imrati, May my teaching drop like rain. May my utterance flow like dew. Hold on to the words, because we'll see there's a little something unfolding over here. K'seirim alei deshe, like storm winds upon the blades of grass. V'chrivivim alei esev, and the drops upon the blades of grass. Now we have to try to understand what's going on over here, right? Let's just stop over here for a second. What is the difference between rain and dew?
Different seasons.
Different seasons, right? Rain is something which normally comes in large amounts, comes from above, right? And dew is something which just appears, but it doesn't normally come. You know, when it pours with rain, it pours. You don't talk about pouring with dew. You can have very dewy nights, that's for sure, but it's not something. Dew is explained by the rabbis like this. Dew is always a bracha. When you live over here in Israel, for example, right, we rely on dew. There's no rain during the dry months. There's no rain at all, right? So where does the ground get moisture from? Before drip irrigation, right? Where does ground get moisture from? From the dew. That's why a lot of emphasis is placed on dew, and that's why there's a custom over here in Israel. When you pray the Amidah in the summer months, you add the word morid atal.
We don't do that outside of Israel?
So by the Sfardim and by the Hasidim, they do. But the minig of Ashkenaz, the custom of the Ashkenazim is not to say Morid Atal outside of the land of Israel. It's interesting. In the land of Israel you do, because dew is always considered to be a blessing. Rain, what is rain? Well, rain is normally a blessing, but there are occasions when rain is not a blessing.
Surely rain is a blessing in Israel.
Rain is a blessing in Israel, but here, for example, when you can have too much rain.
In the wrong season.
For sure, right? If it rains in the wrong season, that's what it says in the Shema, right? That we will do what we're supposed to do. It will rain in the right seasons, and the crops will grow, right? If it rains in the wrong season, that's not called a blessing at all. If you speak to rain could do a lot of harm in different ways. So if it comes in the wrong time, it can be very harmful. If there's too much of it, it can waterlog the ground and it can destroy the crops. If it's too hard, it can break things.
Sukkot, if it rains Sukkot, you can a nightmare.
Right? If it rains on Sukkot, which is a standard procedure in England, but here in Israel, every few years we get rain on Sukkot. We had a few years ago. Right? Whatever. I mean, it happens, but you see that it's not something which is good. Interestingly enough, when we start davening in the summer, when we start davening that HaKadosh Baruch Hu send us bracha in the summer, we start from the first day of Pesach, right? We have special bracha Birkat Tal, and it's recited on Pesach straight away. When we start davening for rain, so we have Birkat Geshem at the end of Sukkot, and then we wait a couple of weeks before we start praying for the rain. Why is that? So the Gemara says, because people had to walk, they had to go home after having been in Yerushalayim for Sukkot. They had to go home from wherever they came from, and it took a maximum of 2 weeks to reach the Euphrates River, which was what they had to cross over in order to get home. If it would start raining before, the Euphrates River, first of all, it would be very muddy on the way home. The Euphrates River would swell, and it would be very difficult to get across. So they push off the prayer for rain for a couple of weeks in order to make sure that everybody's safely beyond that point, right? Which means, what are we learning? We're learning like this, that rain, teachings drop like rain, yarov kamata likhi, tizal katalim rati. And it should be like dew. Dew is always a blessing. Rain is not always a blessing. Even in a place like Israel, where we are desperate for rain, there have been many years where there's been so much rain, the land becomes saturated, it becomes waterlogged, crops get ruined, right? And in the end, it transpired that however much we need the water, with regards to the crops, it wasn't such a great year. Kisirim alei deshe, uchrivim alei esev. What about this? It seems to be like it's repeating itself, the second part of the pasuk, like storm winds upon vegetation, and raindrops upon great blades of grass. Now, you need to know again, desher, it's true you can translate desher as vegetation. But desher in modern Hebrew is a lawn. Right? When you've got a whole lawn full of grass, the chrivivim alei esef is each blade of grass within that lawn. Are you beginning to hear a little something over here? Right? You have the Jewish nation. We're all one nation. But you have each individual within the Jewish nation that needs to be taken care of. Right? Which means like this. You can have a lawn which has got a lot of grass in it which is not healthy. But you won't realize because the lawn looks okay. Right? You've got enough grass over there that's doing okay that it blots out the unhealthy grass. You don't see it. But if you look at each individual blade of grass carefully, you'll see that some of them are healthy and some of them are not. And the ones that aren't need help, right? And that's the idea over here as well. You can have rain and you can have dew. Rain is something massive. Rain is something of which there's a lot. Rain is something which is obvious. Dew is something which is not obvious. It's something which you need to be much more observant to be able to recognize the dew. You can have kisirim ali eis desha. You can have a lawn of grass. You look at the lawn and you say, wow, that looks really pretty, right? But somebody who knows about grass will be able to tell you it may look okay, but it's not very healthy. Each blade is a part of that lawn and needs to be taken care of. Ki shem Hashem ekra, when I call out the name of Hashem, havu goidel leloikeinu. We have to ascribe greatness to our God. Hatzor tamim pa'aloi, ki kol drachav mishpat. The rock, perfect is his work, for all his paths are justice. So first of all, why is God called Tzor, a rock?
It's forever.
Forever, right? It's got the sense of something enormous, something of tremendous weight. It's not going anywhere. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is described as being a rock because a rock is something enormous. It's something which is immovable, something which is consistent, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu Atzor Tamim Poloi, Ki Chol D'Rachav Mishpat. What does that mean? That everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is good. Hold on a second. Even when it doesn't look good to us. Right? A few weeks back, we had in the Parsha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that it says that Sas Anochi, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu rejoiced. HaKadosh Baruch Hu rejoiced in the taking of the Jewish people out of Egypt and of bringing them to Haazinu, and in the same way that God rejoiced in that, He rejoiced also in having to punish them and to send them into exile. So Rav Hirsch asks a very simple question. Rav Shamshon Mafal Hirsch, he says, how can that be? How can HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sas Anochi, in the same way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu rejoices about the good, so he's overjoyed about the good about the bad as well? How does that make any sense?
Because it's good in his eyes.
Oh, which means 100%, right? Which means that whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is good. The fact that we don't see it is neither here nor there.
But the biggest but that we have here is the next thing is that it says, Rega, all of his paths are just. Nitzavim, I placed before you a choice between good and evil.
Yeah.
So how can that be a good? How can evil be good? How can that path be a good path to take?
Justice is a part of his mercy. Is justice.
Evidently, not all of his paths are just. If he's saying
why not?
Because he's saying I placed before you a
Here, I think Pshat is like this. I think that ultimately, whatever path the person takes is going to lead him to God. Our choice.
Okay, fine. So someone doesn't believe in God, is an atheist. That doesn't lead him towards God.
I mean, at the end of his days, it will. That there is no getting away from God. The only question, yes, and the only question over here is not whether the only question over here is how long are you going to push it off? That's all.
How do you know when God set you on? How do we know when God set us on the path He set us on? Or is there no way of us telling that? Do you know what, I've set you on this path?
No. We make choices in our lives, right? And we have to live with the choices that we've made. But all of those choices ultimately are going to bring us to God. So when you've got an atheist, he's going to spend his whole life ignoring God and be met with God at the end of his life. But it's not something that can be got away
saying
from.
that Hitler met with God?
I don't know how this system works exactly, right? But it's inconceivable that Hitler, who wreaked so much, I mean, damage is not the right word, right? Well, you know, what he just forget trying to describe it. He wreaked so much, right, that there wasn't something waiting for him there at the end. What? I don't know. How? Which? Why? I don't know. I really don't.
If you're saying that, then surely he's not our God.
First of all, God is the God of everybody.
So why are we chosen people?
Because inside of the world that God created, there's a hierarchy that allows us to bring God's light down into the world. But God is the God of everybody.
We're just messengers. Right?
I never knew that.
And you know what? Maybe not messengers, maybe ambassadors. Maybe that's a...
Representative of God.
We're not just because we're chosen doesn't mean we're better than other people.
No, I know that, but then what's the point of having?
Because every single system in the world works in the same way. Every system. Here, you go to school, right? In school you have a hierarchy. Whether it's amongst the students, whether it's amongst the faculty.
But that's hierarchy specific to that hierarchy, that school.
No, but it's the other way round. Everything requires a hierarchy. Once you've established your school, you're going to have a hierarchy, otherwise it's not going to work. Every society is like that. There's no society that's not. We've spoken about this in the past. The communists thought they could establish a society that doesn't have a hierarchy, and it wasn't true.
But how can someone that causes hatred meet God? How is that possible?
I don't know what it means to meet God, but there has to be an accounting for what they've done. I don't think it means sitting down and having a cup of tea with him, right, and exchanging business cards. I don't think that's what it means. But there has to be an accounting for everything that person brought into the world.
If they didn't know all of this, if they didn't know what God wants out of them, how they...
But first of all, that there are basics which are universal all over the place, right? So for Hitler to get upstairs and say that he really had no idea that what he was doing was wrong, forget it. It's not going to work. It just isn't. We all know that, right? That no one is going to be held accountable for something which is beyond their
accountability.
All right, beyond their accountability. Right. So, for example, God is not going to hold accountable a Jew, a non-Orthodox Jew who dies and gets upstairs, and God's not going to say to him, "Excuse me, but how come when you ate fish on Friday night, how come you didn't take the bones out after you put the fish in your mouth instead of before?" Right? What's called boirer, one of the 39 melachot, forbidden to do. Right? This guy's going to look at him. He's going to look at God and he's going to say, "What are you talking about?" That's not what he's going to be held accountable for, right? You've got a Jew, who's never been exposed to keeping Shabbos before. He has no comprehension of Shabbos whatsoever. He's going to say to him, "Why did you put the lights on Shabbos?" He's not going to say that to him. What God will confront him with is, "Why didn't you learn about it? You knew you were Jewish. How come you never explored what it meant to be Jewish?" Which everybody's going to be held accountable for what do you call it? Accountability, right? Everyone's going to be held accountable for their accountability. And that person's accountability is not the same as a person standing next to him, that's for sure.
Going back then, 2 seconds about the Hitler situation. Any SS officer, is he going to have the same accountability as Hitler?
No. But he's going to be held completely accountable for what he did, that's for sure. Here, Rabbi say, what did they say? They got up and they said that we were just following orders. Right? It sounds pretty puerile. If you ask me, which you did, I'm going to tell you anyway, right? But if you ask me, speaking from a moral perspective, or speaking from a socio ethical perspective, I think that is a perfectly adequate argument. I really do. This is a society that I lived in. This is what they taught us, and this is what I was told to do.
The morals.
Forget morals for a minute, right? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that as an argument?
Because then, let's say someone that drinks alcohol, right? Or let's say someone's brought up in that kind of household. They're going to drink alcohol because they think it's okay to see. They were just following what their parents did.
Yes. What's wrong with that?
Where do you draw the line? Where's your free will?
Don't get from.
Okay, fine.
Forget free will. Where do you draw the line? Good question. The lines are being drawn by each environment, each society, each home. We all hear the problems, right? When your morals and your ethics are not anchored within something which is absolutely consistent, something which is divine, then I can do whatever I want.
So then, therefore, there no consistency. In
I think that standing up in front of the trials and saying I was just following orders, I think is a lot. I think it's a again, don't misunderstand me. It is a morally. They were morally bankrupt. These people. That's what they're being tried for. But to get up and say that this is what I was brought up with, well, I don't know. Is that such a weak argument? I don't think so. You're supposed. So what's the problem over here? The problem over here is that there's some kind of moral something which is greater than the environment that you were brought up in. There's something greater than the country that you were brought up in. There's something greater than the educational establishment that you went through, right? That's what it comes down to. And that's why what they're saying doesn't wash. Because there's a moral imperative over here. You hear the difference between the two? Yeah.
Also the short-lived nature of their society. Meaning that they had time to know that there was something else. There were other... Unless they were 12 years old.
Himmler once said, give me your children. I don't remember the exactly what he said, but he said something along like, give me your children and I will, and then I'll have I'll try to look it up. I've got it written down somewhere. But what he was saying was, if you give me your children so that we can educate them, then they'll belong to us. They're ours.
How can you rule the education system?
Huh?
How can one person rule the education system?
That's exactly what they did. That's exactly what goes on in every single society, actually. It's no different in the English educational system. It's just in the English educational system, they are following what is considered to be mainstream morals and ethics, that's all. We've spoken about this in the past, but I think it's something which is very, very applicable. I really do. When America tried to impose democracy on certain countries in the Middle East, it was an abject failure. Why? Because their mindset is not the same as the Western world. What do you mean? Democracy is great for the Western world, but that doesn't mean that it's great for everybody else.
Do you think, therefore, there are certain, I would say, concept of orthodoxy that should be put into every the education system inside Israel?
Personally, yes. Is that going to happen? Not in the near future. No, because people are scared stiff over here of religion.
If it can't happen here, where would it happen?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's a very sad question, actually.
Rabbi Geffen was telling us he went to Kotel. When we went to Kotel after the trip, and one of these Israeli kids, he'd been through schools. He said, "Can you find me where the Shema is?" Yeah.
So I was in the Kotel. It wasn't this time of the year. I think it was just before Shavuot, a few years ago. And a lot of high school groups were coming in, non-religious, right? Israeli high school groups were coming in, obviously, for their day in Jerusalem, right? And maybe it was around Yom Yerushalayim, perhaps, it's just before Shavuot, maybe that's when it was, something like that. And I heard there was like a, non-frum group of boys and girls, high school kids, and one of them turns around to the teacher and says, I see that they've got it's called a mechitza, right? They've got a separation between men and women. So she said, why is that? So the teacher, also completely not from, actually answered very nicely. The teacher says if you go into any Orthodox shul, any Orthodox synagogue, you'll see that they separate the men and the women because they don't want to be distracted when they come to pray, that the men pray, together with the men and the women pray together with the women, and that way they won't be distracted by what's going on. They can concentrate better, which I thought was a very nice explanation from somebody who's not Orthodox to a non-Orthodox group, rather than talk about chauvinism and Orthodox Jews and whatever. But it took a little while for me to realize. But about a half an hour later, I suddenly stopped and I realized, you know what? The kids that asked, they must have been 13 or 14, I reckon. And you know what they're asking? You know what that means? That they have never stepped into an Orthodox shul before. They've never seen a separation between men and women before. That's amazing, isn't it? We're talking about Israeli kids, Jewish kids here in the Jewish state. And they are so completely detached from what's going on that I think it's terrible. It's terrifying, actually. That sounded remarkably like the beginning of a sentence.
I didn't want to go off topic.
Anyway, here we have to. What's Pshat? Right? Where are we holding over here? That morals and ethics here. Ki kol derachav mishpat. You want to choose. You can choose to do whatever you want to do here in this world. Just you need to know that at some point you're going to have to do an accounting for whatever it was. And there's no getting away from God. You can't run away from God. You just can't. And God will let you lead your merry life, right? And you can do whatever you want, and you can have whatever you want, and you can experience whatever you want.
Sorry.
Here, last line. Kel emunah ve'ein avel, tzadik v'yashar bo. V'yashar hu. Who is God? God is a God of faith without iniquity. Righteous and fair is He. Now, we all know that, I always say like this, if you don't have any questions about God, about the way that God runs His world, about the things that God does to us as individuals, to us as a nation, to us nationally, internationally, I mean, you've got to be pretty comatose, not?
Is it bad? Is it better to ask questions than of him?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. What this is teaching us over here, though, is that God takes everything into account, which means that whatever God does, even though I may not like it right now, but whatever God is doing it because it needs to be done.
There's an amazing story about a guy. Did you hear the whole National Maxwell story?
Yeah.
About when he passed away at his funeral, and everybody was asked. His father was asked to say a few words, but he couldn't say it, so the rabbi had to say it for him. He said, like a child to the parent, like a kid, like a parent to a child. When we ask something, we don't get it.
Yeah.
That's because we don't need it at that exact moment in time.
It's astonishing, right? Absolutely astonishing to be able to say something like that at that time, right? But there is no doubt that that's the truth. It's absolutely true. And things happen to us, and we don't have any understanding of why they happen. And some things are really, really terrible, right? But that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs to be. If that's what He needs to be, then that's what there has to be.
I had no idea that every challenge He puts us to step towards us reaching our perfection of who we want.
For sure. The problem. You see, you know what the problem is? The problem is that saying these things and understanding these things when you're not going through a challenge is one thing.
Yeah.
And still believing that when you're going through the challenge, that's a lot harder. There's no doubt about it, right? And sometimes we're lucky, and sometimes we see that through the bitterness of whatever we've experienced, we see the goodness at the end. We do see it. It may take a little while, but afterwards, the pieces fall into place, and we suddenly realize that's why it had to be. And sometimes not. Sometimes things happen to us, and we don't have an inkling until we get upstairs. We're not going to have an inkling as to why these things happened at all. Here, we'll end today with there's a story. Rav Levi Yitzchok from Berditchev, one of the great Hasidic rabbis. He was renowned for his love of the Jewish people. He always had a good word to say for the Jews. And it says that when he was the Rebbe, for however many years it was, there were no droughts in his area, in Eastern Europe. Why? Droughts were bad news because if there was droughts, and the Jews were blamed for all of the droughts. So there were no droughts. The year that he died, there was a terrible drought, and of course the Jews were being blamed, and the non-Jews were trying to set up pogroms and all kinds of things. So I can't remember who took his place, but the Rebbe who took his place went to Rav Levi Yitzchak's grave, and he beseeched Rabbi Levi Yitzchak to stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to tell him to send the rain. We need rain. It's terrible. And that night he went to sleep, and Rav Levi Yitzchak came to him in a dream. And he told him, he says, I can't do what you're asking me to do because up here I see why it needs to be. He says, down in the imperfect world that we live in, so over here you've got to do whatever you need to do in order to make things be the way that you imagine they're supposed to be. He says, but don't ask me here in the Olam HaEmes, in the world of truth, don't ask me to try to do things that aren't happening down there because I see why it needs to be. You hear? Kel emunah ve'ein over. No mourning, no iniquity, no nothing. Tzaddik v'yasharhu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is straight, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just. Do we always see it? No, we don't always see it, but that's because we're not because he isn't. We'll stop over here. Mitzvah Hashem. To be continued.